The fluorescent lights on the 42nd floor hummed their electric lullaby at 2:17 in the morning when Raymond Carter pressed his mop against the marble tiles and saw through the glass walls what every janitor learns to unsee. The executives who built empires in these towers never noticed the cleaners who scrubbed their footprints away. Invisibility came with the uniform, the bucket, the cart rattling through corridors where million-dollar decisions echoed in empty conference rooms. Raymond had perfected the art of not existing. 3 years of night shifts had taught him to move like a ghost, to enter and exit spaces without leaving traces beyond chemical-clean floors. He knew which bathrooms the vice presidents preferred, which offices hid bottles of expensive whiskey in bottom drawers, which desks bore the coffee ring stains of anxiety and ambition. He cleaned the evidence of their humanity and carried their secrets in silence. Tonight should have been no different. Floor 42 executive wing start at the west corridor and work east toward the corner offices where the real power nested behind mahogany and floor-to-ceiling glass. His shift supervisor had been clear about the restricted zones, no entry to private offices without authorization. The security protocols existed for reasons that had nothing to do with janitors and everything to do with the information locked inside those rooms. But Raymond saw her through the transparent walls that architects loved and security teams tolerated. Veronica Chase, the 32-year-old CEO whose face graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune, whose company's stock price was tracked in real time by analysts across 3 continents, whose reputation for ruthless efficiency had built a technology empire in under a decade. She slumped in her leather chair at an angle the human body shouldn't achieve without collapsing entirely. Her head tilted wrong like a puppet with cut strings. Her left arm dangled, fingers brushing the carpet in a way that whispered paralysis. The right side of her mouth pulled down while the left stayed neutral, creating an asymmetry that screamed neurological catastrophe. Raymond's mop clattered against the marble floor. The sound echoed through the empty corridor, harsh and final. His hands moved before his mind caught up, already reaching for the master key on his belt, already knowing it wouldn't work on executive offices, already calculating the seconds ticking past while neurons died by the thousands in Veronica Chase's brain. 3 years ago, on a Tuesday night that had started normal and ended in a way that destroyed normal forever, Raymond had come home from his first shift at a shopping mall. He worked 2 jobs, then 2 days at a warehouse, nights mopping floors at a retail complex where teenagers spilled soda and adults dropped French fries. Sarah had been making dinner, their daughter Cassie's favorite pasta, with the sauce from the jar, because Sarah always said homemade was overrated when you had a full-time job and a 3-year-old who thought sleep was optional. Raymond had walked into their apartment expecting the smell of garlic and tomatoes. Instead, he found silence. Not the peaceful kind, the wrong kind, the kind that lived in the space where sound should be. Sarah lay on the kitchen floor between the stove and the refrigerator, her body twisted, her face slack, her eyes open but seeing nothing. Cassie sat at the kitchen table, 3 years old and confused, saying, "Mommy's sleeping," funny, saying she couldn't wake Mommy up, saying it with the innocent certainty of a child who still believed adults could fix anything. Raymond had frozen. 6 seconds, maybe 7, an eternity, compressed into heartbeats that echoed too loud in his ears. He dropped to his knees beside his wife and shook her shoulders, called her name, begged her to wake up, told her this wasn't funny, said they needed her, promised things he'd never keep. Minutes evaporated into panic while he tried to understand what he was seeing, tried to make her responsive through force of will and desperate hands. When he finally called 911, when the operator's calm voice asked questions he couldn't answer coherently, when the ambulance arrived 17 minutes after Sarah had collapsed, it was already too late. The doctors explained later in the antiseptic language of medical professionals, delivering unbearable news that time mattered with strokes. The window for intervention was narrow. Minutes made the difference between recovery and permanence, between life and the absence of it. Sarah's stroke had been massive. Even immediate treatment might not have saved her. But Raymond would spend 3 years replaying those 6 or 7 seconds, when he froze, when he shook her instead of calling for help, when he wasted time trying to wake the dead. The doctor's reassurances meant nothing. The might not have was drowned by the definitely didn't. Now Veronica Chase slumped in her executive chair, with the same facial droop, the same arm. Weakness? The same wrongness that radiated from a body shutting down while the person inside screamed silently. Raymond recognized every symptom because he'd memorized them like scripture after the funeral. After the grief counselor suggested he take a CPR class as part of his healing process, after he spent 6 months learning every warning sign of every medical emergency because knowledge was the only penance he could perform. His master key didn't work on executive offices. The electronic lock blinked red, denying access with bureaucratic indifference. 10 feet of space and a reinforced glass door separated Raymond from Veronica. In his peripheral vision, the security camera mounted in the corridor's corner rotated slowly on its mechanical base, its lens recording everything. The fire extinguisher hung on the wall between two abstract paintings whose insurance value probably exceeded Raymond's annual salary. He grabbed it, felt the weight settle into his grip, and swung hard at the glass door. The impact sent shockwaves up his arms. The glass spiderweb but held. He swung again harder, driving the metal cylinder through the compromised surface. The door shattered inward, raining fragments across Veronica's office floor. Alarms erupted immediately. The building's security system screamed its electronic outrage through speakers embedded in the ceiling, a piercing wail that announced unauthorized entry, that summoned guards from their posts, that logged the violation in databases Raymond would face later. He stepped through the broken door frame glass, crunching under his work boots, already pulling his phone from his pocket. The 911 operator answered on the second ring. Her voice carried practiced calm that acknowledged emergency while maintaining control. Raymond gave the address, gave the floor number, gave the symptoms in the clinical language he'd learned from medical websites and emergency response videos. The words came steady: 32-year-old female, unresponsive, facial droop on the left side, left arm, weakness, slurred, speech attempt. When I first saw her. No seizure activity that I've witnessed. Breathing appears shallow but steady. Pulse rapid when checked. Approximately 3 minutes since I found her. This is a stroke. We need an ambulance now. The operator kept him on the line, asking questions designed to assess and stabilize until professionals arrived. Raymond had already moved to Veronica's side. Her leather chair was the kind that cost more than a used car, ergonomically designed to support the human body through 16-hour workdays. He tilted it back carefully, mindful of neck alignment, of the spine's vulnerable architecture. 3 years ago, he had grabbed Sarah's shoulders and shaken her. The grief counselor later explained with gentle professionalism that his instinct to wake her had been natural, human, and exactly wrong. Stroke victims needed stillness, needed proper positioning, needed immediate medical intervention that only trained responders could provide. Shaking someone whose brain was actively dying accomplished nothing except wasting time. Raymond wouldn't make that mistake twice. He checked Veronica's breathing by watching her chest rise and fall, counted the rhythm against his own heartbeat. Her pulse hammered against his fingers when he pressed them to her carotid artery, fast, irregular. Her cardiovascular system responding to the crisis consuming her brain. He loosened the silk scarf around her neck, removed the constraint without disturbing her position. The desk clock read 2:18. 1 minute had passed since he'd spotted her through the glass. Time had become elastic, stretching into infinity, while also accelerating toward a deadline he couldn't see but felt approaching with each passing second. Every minute without treatment meant approximately 2 million neurons lost. The statistics had haunted Raymond since learning them, the brutal mathematics of brain death playing out in real time. He positioned Veronica on her side in the recovery position they'd taught him in the CPR class he'd forced himself to attend 6 months after Sarah's funeral. The class had been held in a community center basement on Tuesday nights, taught by a retired paramedic who spoke with authority earned through decades of emergencies. Raymond had been the only student over 40, surrounded by teenagers fulfilling a requirement for their driver's licenses and young parents learning to protect their children. Every session had been agony. Every demonstration on the practice dummy had brought back the memory of Sarah's body on the kitchen floor, of his hands shaking her shoulders, of his voice breaking as he begged her to wake up. But he'd completed the course, earned his certification, carried the knowledge like armor against the possibility of failing someone else the way he'd failed his wife. Veronica's eyes fluttered unfocused. Her lips moved without producing sound, tongue struggling against paralysis to form words her damaged brain couldn't coordinate. The frustration in her gaze cut through the neurological chaos. She knew something was catastrophically wrong, could feel herself disconnected from her own body, trapped inside a system that had stopped responding to commands. Raymond knelt beside her chair. His voice came out quieter than intended, competing with the alarm still screaming through the building's speakers. Don't try to talk. Help is coming. You're going to be fine. He didn't know if that was true. He didn't know if the ambulance would arrive in time, if the hospital could intervene successfully, if Veronica Chase would survive the night or wake up with permanent damage that would redefine her entire existence. But he knew the sound of a human voice might be the only anchor she had right now, the only thread connecting her to the world outside her malfunctioning brain. So he kept talking. He told her she was safe, told her the ambulance was coming, told her to stay calm, told her everything would be okay, even as his mind calculated the minutes ticking past and the millions of neurons dying with each one. He kept his hand on her shoulder, a physical reminder that she wasn't alone, that someone had found her, that help was minutes away instead of hours or never. The elevator chimed in the distance. Footsteps echoed through the corridor outside, multiple sets converging on the executive wing. Raymond checked his watch again. 4 minutes since he'd seen her through the glass. 5 since the stroke had likely started based on the progression of symptoms. 6 minutes before anyone could reach her without intervention. The paramedics burst through the stairwell door, carrying equipment cases that rattled with the tools of emergency medicine. They moved with practiced efficiency, splitting into roles without discussion, one immediately assessing Veronica, while another pulled out monitoring equipment. Raymond stepped back, giving them space, answering their rapid questions with the precision he'd rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times since Sarah's death. Found her at 217, called immediately. Left-sided facial droop, left arm weakness, attempted speech, but couldn't form words, no seizure activity I witnessed. She's breathing, but pulse is rapid and irregular. I positioned her on her side about 3 minutes ago. I think she's been down maybe 5 or 6 minutes total. The lead paramedic glanced at him while his hands continued their assessment. Mid-40s, graying at the temples, eyes that had seen enough emergencies to recognize competent reporting when they heard it. You did good, real good. Time matters with strokes, and you didn't waste any. They had Veronica on a gurney within 90 seconds. The practice choreography of emergency response played out in efficient movements. 4-line established oxygen masks secured portable monitors displaying numbers Raymond had learned to interpret from websites about stroke care. Blood pressure elevated, heart rate too fast, oxygen saturation dropping. The data painted a picture of a body in crisis systems struggling to compensate for a brain under attack. Raymond watched them wheel her toward the elevator. Only then did he notice the blood on his hands, small cuts from the broken glass that had split skin while he'd focused on Veronica. The adrenaline had masked the pain, but now it surfaced minor compared to the larger emergency, but present nonetheless. His legs shook slightly, the physical aftermath of crisis beginning to manifest as his body realized what had just happened. Security guards converged from 2 directions, hands on their radios, expressions mixing concern with confusion. The head guard was a man named Phillips, who'd worked the building for 15 years, whose wife packed him lunches that he ate at 2 a.m. in the break room while watching news on his phone. Phillips had always been decent to Raymond, one of the few security personnel who acknowledged the cleaning staff with actual conversation instead of the usual invisibility. Phillips took in the scene with a sweep of his eyes, the shattered glass door, the fire extinguisher lying on the floor where Raymond had dropped it, the blood dripping from Raymond's hands, the retreating gurney disappearing into the elevator. His expression shifted through surprise, understanding, and something that might have been respect. Carter, you better have a hell of a story. Raymond did have a story, but exhaustion was settling into his bones now that the emergency had passed. The adrenaline that had carried him through the crisis was draining away, leaving behind a hollow feeling that he recognized from 3 years ago, from the hours after Sarah died, when his body finally acknowledged what his mind couldn't yet accept. They took him to the security office on the 10th floor, a windowless room with too many monitors and not enough ventilation. Phillips personally bandaged Raymond's hands while his partner pulled up the camera footage, rewinding to 2:17 when Raymond had spotted Veronica through the glass. The building manager was being called, Phillips explained, because this kind of incident, broken door, violated security protocols. Property damage in the executive wing required management approval before any decisions were made. Raymond sat in a plastic chair and watched his own actions play out on the monitor. The footage showed him stopping mid-motion mop, falling head turning toward Veronica's office. Showed him trying his master key, rejecting its failure, grabbing the fire extinguisher. showed him breaking the glass without hesitation, stepping through, pulling out his phone. The entire sequence from first recognition to 911 call had taken 11 seconds. 11 seconds between seeing and acting, between recognizing catastrophe and responding to it. 3 years ago, he'd wasted 6 or 7 seconds frozen in panic. The difference between 11 seconds of action and 6 seconds of paralysis was the difference between life and death, between saving someone and failing them. Raymond watched the footage and felt nothing resembling pride, only the grim satisfaction of having learned an expensive lesson and finally applying it. Phillips played the footage 3 times, first for himself, then for his supervisor, then for the building manager who arrived at 3:30, still wearing the sweatpants he'd pulled on over his pajamas when the call woke him. Douglas Chen managed the property for the real estate investment trust that owned the tower. His job involved maximizing occupancy rates and minimizing liability exposure, which meant this situation: unauthorized entry, property damage, potential lawsuit from any number of angles, was exactly the kind of crisis that justified his 6-figure salary. Chen watched the footage in silence. His expression cycled through anger at the property damage, confusion about Raymond's actions, and finally something Raymond couldn't quite identify. When the video ended for the 3rd time, Chen turned to Phillips. "What's the status on Ms. Chase?" Phillips checked his phone. "Ambulance reached the hospital 12 minutes ago. They're running tests, but she's alive and responsive. The paramedics said another 5 minutes and she'd have had massive permanent damage. Another 10 and she wouldn't have survived at all." Chen absorbed this information while staring at the frozen image on the monitor. Raymond, mid-swing fire extinguisher, raised determination etched in every line of his body. The building manager's legal mind was clearly calculating risks and liabilities, weighing the cost of a broken door against the cost of a dead CEO, measuring property damage against potential wrongful death lawsuits. Finally, Chen turned to Raymond. His voice carried professional neutrality that revealed nothing about his internal deliberations. "Go home, Carter. We'll figure this out later." Raymond nodded. He collected his coat from his locker in the basement, walked past the mop and bucket he'd abandoned 7 floors up, and exited through the service entrance as dawn began lightening the eastern sky. The city was stirring, early risers emerging for their morning routines. Delivery trucks rumbled past. A jogger crossed at the intersection, earbuds, and oblivious to the drama that had played out while most of the city slept. The subway ride home took 40 minutes. Raymond sat in a corner seat and watched the stops pass, each one familiar, from 3 years of this commute in reverse. His hands throbbed where the cuts had been minor injuries that would heal in a week. The bandages Phillips had applied were already showing spots of blood seeping through the gauze. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother-in-law. "Got Cassie to school. She asked why you weren't home for breakfast. Told her work ran late. Call when you can." Raymond typed back a brief thanks, added that he'd explain later, and pocketed the phone. Explaining to Cassie would be complicated. His daughter had inherited Sarah's intelligence and intuition, the combination that made her too perceptive for her own good. She'd know something significant had happened. The question was how much to share with an 8-year-old who'd already lost her mother to the same medical emergency her father had just witnessed in someone else. The apartment was empty when Raymond arrived home. Cassie would be at school until 3, which gave him several hours of sleep before picking her up. But sleep felt impossible. The adrenaline had fully metabolized, leaving behind exhaustion that somehow wasn't enough to shut down his racing mind. He made coffee, sat at the kitchen table where Cassie did her homework, and stared at nothing. His phone rang. Unknown number. Raymond almost ignored it, but something made him answer on the 4th ring. "Mr. Carter." The voice was female, professional, efficient. "This is Angela Ross. I'm calling on behalf of Veronica Chase. Ms. Chase would like to meet with you if you're available. She was released from the hospital this morning, and she'd very much like to thank you personally." Raymond's grip tightened on the phone. She was alive, more than alive, released from the hospital, which meant she'd survived without catastrophic damage, meant the intervention had been fast enough, meant he hadn't failed this time. Yes, of course. When they arranged for Sunday afternoon, an address in a neighborhood Raymond recognized from driving through on his way to other destinations. The kind of area where buildings had doormen and parking spots cost more than cars. He ended the call and sat for a long moment, coffee cooling in his cup, trying to process what had just happened. Friday and Saturday passed in a blur of routine disrupted. Raymond didn't return to work. Chen had told him to wait for contact from management, which meant his employment status existed in bureaucratic limbo. Cassie asked questions he deflected with partial truths. He'd helped someone who got sick at work. The person was okay now. Everything was fine. She studied him with Sarah's eyes, seeing through the reassurances to the truth he wasn't sharing. But she was 8, and 8-year-olds could be distracted by other concerns, upcoming science fair projects, friend drama from the playground, the injustice of bedtimes that came too early. Raymond seized the distractions gratefully, played along with her redirections, and avoided thinking about Sunday. Sunday arrived anyway. Raymond borrowed a dress shirt from his neighbor Marcus, a man who worked in an office and owned clothes appropriate for spaces Raymond usually cleaned rather than inhabited. The shirt fit adequately if he didn't breathe too deeply. He dropped Cassie at her grandmother's house, endured Beatrice's knowing looks. Sarah's mother had a sixth sense for secrets, and took 3 buses to reach the address Angela Ross had provided. The building rose 40 stories, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. The doorman wore a uniform nicer than Raymond's borrowed shirt. The lobby featured a fountain whose water bill probably exceeded Raymond's monthly rent. The elevator opened directly into Veronica's penthouse, which occupied the entire top floor and offered views of the city that transformed urban sprawl into something almost beautiful. Veronica stood by floor-to-ceiling windows that faced south, her silhouette backlit by afternoon sun. She looked different than she had on the office floor, smaller somehow, more human, though that might have been the context. CEOs seem godlike when you clean their offices at night. In person and private space, she was just a woman who'd survived something terrible and now had to figure out what came next. A cane rested against a nearby chair. She turned slowly, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had betrayed them and couldn't yet be fully trusted. Her face was pale, but composed makeup applied to minimize the slight asymmetry that remained on the left side. Her speech would likely still show effects, the slowed cadence, the occasional word search, but she'd regained enough function to be released from the hospital, which meant the intervention had been successful. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming. Please sit down. Can I get you anything?" Raymond shook his head, perched on the edge of a sofa that probably cost more than 3 months of his rent. The penthouse was decorated in what magazines called minimalist, but felt empty to someone used to spaces cluttered with evidence of living. No photos on the walls, no books on the shelves, no signs that anyone actually lived here instead of just sleeping between work sessions. "How are you feeling?" Veronica smiled. The expression was slightly lopsided but genuine, reaching her eyes in a way that suggested real emotion rather than polite performance. "I'm alive," which according to my neurologist is something of a miracle. They said another 5 minutes and I'd have had massive permanent damage. Another 10 and I wouldn't have survived at all. She lowered herself into the chair across from him, moving with exaggerated care. The doctors had explained that she'd had an ischemic stroke caused by a blood clot in her brain. The clot-busting medication had worked because Raymond's quick response had gotten her to the hospital within the critical time window. Minutes had made the difference between recovery and catastrophe. "You knew what you were looking at. The paramedics said you called it in perfectly positioned. Me correctly gave them exactly the information they needed. They said most people panic, waste time, call the wrong number. You didn't." Raymond stared at his hands, the cuts from the broken glass still healing beneath fresh bandages. "My wife. 3 years ago, I came home from my shift and found her on the kitchen floor. I didn't know what I was looking at. I shook her, tried to wake her up, wasted 6 or 7 minutes before I called for help. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of understanding that only came from shared experience with loss." Veronica's expression shifted professional polish, giving way to something raw. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You saved me because you couldn't save her." Raymond nodded. After Sarah died, he'd taken the CPR class, learned all the signs, memorized the protocols. He'd turned his failure into education, transformed grief into preparation, carried the knowledge like a burden he hoped never to use but knew he couldn't afford to lack. "I'm glad I could help. I'm glad you're okay." Veronica leaned forward, intensity replacing the careful neutrality she'd maintained until now. "Mr. Carter Raymond, I need you to understand something. I was in that office at 2 in the morning because I'm always in that office. I built my company from nothing, worked 18-hour days for 10 years, sacrificed everything for success. I don't have friends. I don't have family. I have employees and board members and investors. Her voice caught slightly. When I woke up in that hospital, the only person who'd been with me in the ambulance was a stranger I'd never met. Do you know what that feels like? Raymond thought about Cassie, about coming home every morning to her sleepy smile and morning hugs, about the drawings she taped to the refrigerator and the way she'd crawl into his lap when he looked tired. No, I don't. Veronica stood and walked to the windows, leaning on her cane. The movement was careful, deliberate, each step a negotiation with a body still relearning how to function. My mother died when I was 16. Stroke. I was taking the SATs that day, the most important test of my life, they told us. She called me 3 times. I didn't answer because I was in the testing room, because phones weren't allowed, because following the rules mattered more than anything else. Her reflection in the glass showed tears she didn't let fall. She dotted alone on our kitchen floor while I was filling in bubbles with a number 2 pencil. After that, I promised myself I'd be so successful her death would mean something, that I'd prove she didn't sacrifice everything for nothing. She turned to face Raymond fully. But you know what I realized in that hospital bed? I've become exactly what I was afraid of. I've built an empire and I'm completely alone, just like she was. Raymond didn't know how to respond to that. He existed in a different world than Veronica Chase, a world where success was measured in paid bills, in children's laughter, rather than stock prices and magazine covers. The distance between their lives felt unbridgeable, separated by money and class and circumstances that made this conversation strange. I want to do something for you. Veronica's tone shifted, becoming more businesslike, the CEO asserting herself against the vulnerable woman who'd shared too much. I know you probably don't want money, and I respect that, but I have resources, connections, opportunities. Your daughter Cassie, right? Angela mentioned you have a daughter. Raymond stiffened. How do you know about Cassie? I asked about you. The building manager told me you work 2 jobs, that you're raising her alone, she paused, choosing words carefully, that you're struggling. Please don't be offended. I'm not trying to insult you. I'm trying to help. Raymond stood, the familiar pride rising in his chest. The pride that had sustained him through 3 years of barely scraping by, of second-hand clothes and generic groceries, of telling Cassie they couldn't afford things while pretending it was a choice rather than necessity. We're fine. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I didn't save your life because I wanted something from you. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Veronica studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I know, that's exactly why I want to help. Raymond left the penthouse feeling unsettled. The elevator descended 40 floors while his stomach did complicated things that had nothing to do with emotion. The envelope Veronica had pressed into his hands sat heavy in his jacket pocket. She'd moved fast while he was gathering his coat, producing it from somewhere, and insisting he take it before he could refuse. For Cassie's education fund, not charity investment. Invest in her the way you invested those 10 minutes in saving my life. Please. He didn't open it until he was on the bus home, seated in the back, where other passengers wouldn't see. Inside was a check for $20,000 and a handwritten note that echoed what she'd said. The amount staggered him. $20,000 was nearly what he made in a year working both jobs. $20,000 would cover 2 years of the private school Cassie's teacher had mentioned last month, the school with the science program that had made his daughter's eyes light up when Mrs. Henderson described it. Raymond stared at the check. The paper felt both weightless and impossibly heavy. Accepting it meant acknowledging he couldn't provide for his daughter alone, meant admitting the pride he'd clung to was costing Cassie opportunities. Refusing it meant denying her chances he couldn't create on his own, meant letting ego trump her future. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory, something she'd said a month before she died when Raymond had refused help from her mother with rent. Pride is just fear wearing fancy clothes. Don't let it cost us what matters. He'd been angry, then defensive about his ability to provide. Now he understood what she'd meant. Pride protected the ego at the expense of everything else. Love required vulnerability, required accepting help, required putting someone else's needs before your own self-image. By the time Raymond reached his stop, he'd made a decision. He'd cash the check, put the money toward Cassie's school, and that would be the end of it. A debt repaid a transaction, completed nothing more. Veronica Chase would return to her penthouse and her empire. Raymond would return to his night shifts in his small apartment. Their lives would separate back into their proper orbits, the brief intersection already receding into history. He picked up Cassie from his mother-in-law's house. Beatrice hugged him at the door, held on longer than usual, said nothing but communicated volumes through the pressure of her embrace. She knew something had happened. She'd wait for him to share when he was ready. Cassie chattered the entire bus ride home about a science video they'd watched at school about nebulas and star formation and how the universe kept making new stars from old ones. Her enthusiasm was infectious. Her questions rapid-fire her imagination, already spinning theories about alien life and parallel dimensions. Raymond listened and responded and felt gratitude so intense it bordered on physical pain. This was what mattered, not success or achievement or empires built from ambition. This a daughter who asked why instead of accepting answers, who looked at stars and saw possibilities, who'd survived her mother's death and still found wonder in the world. That night after Cassie was asleep, Raymond sat on their small balcony and looked at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Veronica Chase was probably working despite doctor's orders, probably answering emails and reviewing contracts, probably unable to stop even after her body had nearly stopped permanently. Somewhere out there, she was alone in her penthouse, surrounded by success that looked like emptiness when you got close enough to see it clearly. Raymond thought about the $20,000, about pride and love and the difference between them. He thought about Sarah, about the last conversation they'd never finished, about the call she'd made that he hadn't answered because he was busy mopping floors in a mall food court. He thought about Cassie's future and his own limitations, about what he could provide versus what she deserved. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Thank you again, not just for saving my life, but for seeing me when I was invisible. That meant more than you know." Raymond stared at the message. He typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on something simple. "You're not invisible. You just weren't looking at yourself the way other people see you." The response came quickly. "Maybe. Or maybe I wasn't looking at the right people. The ones who actually see instead of just looking. Good night, Raymond. Hug Cassie for me." Raymond frowned at that last line. Hug Cassie for me suggested familiarity, suggested connection, suggested this wasn't ending as cleanly as he'd planned. But he was tired, and overthinking felt impossible with exhaustion pressing down, and tomorrow he'd figure out what came next. He went inside, checked on Cassie, who slept with her arms wrapped around a stuffed dinosaur Sarah had given her 4th birthday, and fell into his own bed. Sleep claimed him immediately, dreamless and deep, the kind of unconsciousness that followed crisis and carried no obligation to remember or process what had happened. Monday morning arrived with a call from the building management and office. Douglas Chen's assistant, speaking in the careful language of HR communications, informed Raymond that his employment status was under review, pending a formal investigation of the incident. He should not report for his shift until further notice. He would continue receiving pay during the review period. Someone would contact him within the week with next steps. Raymond hung up and stared at nothing. His job existed in limbo, possibly over, possibly not. 3 years of night shifts, of invisible labor, of economic necessity, wrapped in humiliation, all of it suspended because he'd broken a door to save someone's life. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so exhausting. He took Cassie to school and returned to an apartment that felt too quiet during daylight hours. The check sat on the kitchen counter, where he'd left it $20,000 in careful handwriting, signed by Veronica Chase. Raymond picked it up, felt its weight again, and made a decision he'd probably regret. The bank was 3 blocks away. The teller looked at the check, looked at Raymond, looked at the check again, and excused herself to get a supervisor. They verified everything, the account and the signature, the authenticity of the paper before finally processing it. Raymond walked out with a receipt and the surreal feeling of having more money in his account than he'd ever had at once. That afternoon, he called the private school Mrs. Henderson had mentioned. He made an appointment to visit to discuss enrollment to see if Cassie could start the following semester. The admissions coordinator sounded pleased, mentioned they had spaces available for qualified students, asked about Cassie's academic history and interests. Raymond hung up and felt simultaneously like he'd made the right choice and betrayed some fundamental principle he couldn't quite name. Pride whispered that he was taking charity. Love answered that he was accepting opportunity. The argument played out in his head while he made dinner, while he helped Cassie with homework, while they watched a nature documentary about wolves that she found fascinating and he barely registered. That night, after Cassie was asleep, his phone rang. Veronica's voice came through, clear but slightly slower than normal, the residual effect of the stroke. I heard the bank confirm the check cleared. I'm glad you cashed it. Raymond sat on the balcony, phone pressed to his ear. I'm not comfortable with this, I know. But you did it anyway, which means you love your daughter more than you love being right. That's good. That's exactly how it should be. Silence stretched between them, filled with things neither knew how to articulate. I want to ask you something. Veronica's tone shifted, becoming less certain. And you can absolutely say no, but I'd like to meet Cassie. Not as some grand gesture, just I'd like to meet the girl whose father saved my life, if that's okay with you. Raymond's first instinct was to refuse to maintain the boundary between their worlds, to keep Cassie separate from complications he didn't fully understand. But something in Veronica's voice stopped him, not the CEO confidence, but genuine uncertainty, the vulnerability of someone asking for connection after nearly dying alone. Okay, yes. When they arranged for the following Saturday, the Science Museum, because Veronica was a major donor and had access to private tours, because Cassie loved science, because neutral ground felt safer than either of their homes. Raymond agreed and hung up and wondered what he'd just set in motion. The week passed, no word from building management about his job, no clarity about what came next professionally, just days that felt suspended between past and future, between one version of his life and another he couldn't yet see clearly. Saturday morning, Raymond dressed Cassie in nice clothes and endured her questions about where they were going and who they were meeting. He settled on a version of truth that felt manageable. We're meeting the woman I helped when she got sick at work. She wants to thank us. Cassie absorbed this with the seriousness she applied to important information. Is she nice? I think so. But you can decide for yourself. They met Veronica at the museum entrance. She arrived in a car with a driver, which made Cassie's eyes widen. But when Veronica climbed out, moving carefully with her cane, Cassie's expression shifted from awe to concern. Are you okay? You're walking like my grandma when her hip hurts. Veronica's laughter sounded surprised and genuine. I'm getting better. Your dad helped me when I was very sick, and now I'm recovering. It takes time, but I'll be okay. Cassie nodded, satisfied with this explanation. She took Veronica's free hand with the unself-conscious trust of children who hadn't yet learned to be wary. Dad says you like science. Me too. Can we see the dinosaurs first? They're my favorite. The museum visit was supposed to last 2 hours. It stretched to 4. Raymond watched from a careful distance as Veronica listened to Cassie's endless questions about planets and asteroids and whether aliens might live in the ice moons of Jupiter. Veronica didn't simplify her answers or talk down to an 8-year-old. She engaged seriously, explaining orbital mechanics and the search for extraterrestrial life with the same focus she probably brought to board meetings. Cassie glowed. Her enthusiasm dampened since Sarah's death by grief. She couldn't fully articulate resurfaced with an intensity that made Raymond's chest tight. He tried to give her this engagement with the world encouragement of her curiosity, but working 2 jobs left limited energy for museum visits and science discussions. Watching someone else provide what he couldn't hurt and felt right simultaneously. On the drive home, Veronica had insisted on her driver taking them, and Raymond was too tired to argue. Cassie fell asleep against his shoulder. Veronica sat across from them in the spacious back seat of a car Raymond couldn't identify, but knew cost more than his first apartment. She's remarkable. Veronica's voice was quiet-pitched, not to wake the sleeping child. She asked me about my company, about what we do. When I told her about the technology we develop, she asked if it could help people who can't walk. Not, does it help? Could it? She's already thinking about solutions. Raymond looked down at his daughter's sleeping face. Her mother was like that, always trying to fix things, always seeing what could be instead of just what was. Veronica was quiet for a moment. I never wanted children. I told myself it was because of my career, because I was too busy, because I had too many responsibilities. But the truth is, I was terrified of failing the way I failed my mother, of being unavailable when it mattered most. She met Raymond's eyes. Watching you with Cassie, you're present. Even when you're working 2 jobs, even when you're exhausted, you're there. That's not something money can buy. The car pulled up to Raymond's building. The driver got out to open the door, but Veronica stopped him with a gesture. She looked at Raymond with an expression that combined gratitude and something more complicated. I'd like to do this again, if you're comfortable with it. Not as some grand gesture, just I enjoyed today. I can't remember the last time I did something that wasn't work-related. This felt good. Raymond shifted Cassie's weight, carefully preparing to carry her upstairs. Okay, yeah, Cassie would like that. They exchanged numbers. Veronica's driver helped Raymond with the door. He carried Cassie upstairs to their small apartment that felt even smaller after the spaciousness of the car and the museum and Veronica's penthouse. He put his daughter to bed, watched her settle into sleep with her stuffed dinosaur, and tried to process what was happening. The boundaries he tried to maintain were dissolving. Veronica Chase wasn't staying in her separate world. She was entering his, bringing complications and resources and needs he didn't fully understand. Part of him wanted to stop this before it went further, to thank her for the check and wish her well, and return to the simple difficulty of his previous life. But Cassie's face during the museum visit haunted him, the joy, the engagement, the aliveness that had been missing for 3 years. And Veronica's voice when she talked about being afraid of failing, about being unavailable, about dying alone, that haunted him too. Raymond stood on his balcony and looked at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Veronica was probably in her penthouse, probably processing the same strange day, probably wondering what came next. His phone buzzed with a text. "Thank you for today. Cassie is extraordinary. You should be very proud." Raymond typed back. "Thank you for spending time with her. It meant a lot." The response came quickly. "It meant a lot to me too. More than I expected." "Sleep well, Raymond." He went inside and tried to sleep. Tomorrow he'd figure out what this meant, what he was allowing into their lives, whether this strange connection forming between a janitor and a billionaire could possibly lead anywhere good. Tomorrow he'd worry about consequences and complications in the distance between their worlds. Tonight he'd just be grateful for Cassie's happiness, for Veronica's survival, for the strange mercy of being given a chance to save someone this time, even if he couldn't save everyone. The check was cashed. The connection was forming. The boundary between their lives was already blurred beyond recognition. Whatever came next, Raymond had already crossed the point of no return. So, ma'am, metrics, part 1 complete. Word count 1,034 words, target 18,020,000. Continuing to target. Actually, I need to continue and meet the required word count. Let me expand part 1 significantly. Tuesday morning brought rain that drummed against Raymond's windows like nature demanding answers he didn't have. His phone stayed silent. No call from building management, no text from Veronica, no clarity about what his life was becoming. The limbo felt suffocating in ways that night shifts never had. At least cleaning floors provided purpose, however invisible. This suspension left him floating in uncertainty. Cassie sat at the kitchen table working through math problems while rain streaked the windows. She'd been quieter than usual since Saturday, processing the museum visit in whatever mysterious way 8-year-old minds worked. Raymond made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, and tried not to hover while she calculated fractions. "Dad," her voice came small, tentative, "is Miss Veronica going to visit again?" Raymond flipped eggs he wasn't really paying attention to. "I don't know, baby. Maybe. Would you like that?" Cassie nodded without looking up from her worksheet. "She's nice, and she knows a lot about space. She said I could be a scientist if I wanted, that lots of women are scientists now." Raymond slid eggs onto plates. "Your mom wanted to be a scientist. Did I ever tell you that?" Cassie's head came up eyes wide with the hunger children had for stories about parents they'd lost too soon. "Really, what kind?" "Marine biology. She loved the ocean, wanted to study dolphins and whales. But then she got pregnant with you and decided being your mom was more important than anything else." He carried plates to the table, sat across from his daughter. "She would have been good at both, though. She was smart like you, asked questions about everything, wanted to understand how things worked." Cassie absorbed this, adding it to the collection of Sarah facts she hoarded like treasure. Then she returned to her math with renewed focus, as if solving fractions was now connected to some larger purpose. Raymond watched her work and felt the familiar ache of all the ways Sarah was missing. This missing. Watching their daughter grow into someone remarkable. His phone buzzed. A text from Veronica. "I know this might seem forward, but I have tickets to a concert tomorrow evening. Classical music at the Performing Arts Center. Would you and Cassie like to come? It's a children's program, interactive, designed to introduce kids to orchestral music." Raymond stared at the message. Forward was an understatement. They'd had one museum visit and Veronica was already planning more outings. The speed felt aggressive, like she was trying to force intimacy through proximity and shared experiences. Or maybe she was just lonely, and the museum visit had shown her what she'd been missing, and now she wanted more of it. He typed, "That's very kind, but you don't have to keep doing things for us." The response came almost immediately. "I know I don't have to. I want to." Please, that final word, please carried a vulnerability that cut through Raymond's resistance. He'd never heard a billionaire say please before, at least not with genuine need behind it. Usually powerful people phrase requests as statements, their desires assumed to be commands. But Veronica was actually asking, in a way that suggested Raymond's answer mattered. "Okay, yes, thank you." He told Cassie about the concert. Her excitement was immediate and unfiltered, the kind of joy that made adult complications seem petty by comparison. She'd never been to the Performing Arts Center, never seen an orchestra, never experienced the particular magic of live music performed by 50 people working in synchronized purpose. Raymond borrowed another shirt from Marcus, who was starting to ask questions about why Raymond suddenly needed office clothes. He deflected with vague mentions of meetings, hoping Marcus wouldn't push harder. The truth that a billionaire CEO had adopted them as some kind of charity project or emotional support family sounded absurd even in Raymond's own mind. Wednesday evening, Veronica's driver picked them up. Cassie had insisted on wearing her favorite dress, the one Sarah had bought her 2 birthdays ago, that was starting to get too small. Raymond had wanted to say they couldn't go to the Performing Arts Center dressed like this, that they'd look out of place among the donors and season ticket holders. But Cassie's excitement overrode his embarrassment. Veronica met them in the lobby wearing a dress that probably cost more than Raymond's monthly rent, but somehow didn't make him feel underdressed. She'd perfected the art of wealth without ostentation, or maybe she was just good at putting people at ease. She still used the cane, but moved with more confidence than she had on Saturday. "Cassie, you look beautiful. That's a perfect concert dress." Cassie beamed and launched into a detailed explanation of why dinosaurs on dresses were scientifically accurate, even though most dinosaurs probably didn't have the bright colors depicted in children's clothing. Veronica listened with apparent fascination, asked follow-up questions about theropods and herbivores, and generally treated an 8-year-old's paleontology tangent like serious discourse. The concert hall was beautiful in ways that made Raymond uncomfortable. Too much gilt and velvet, too many people in expensive clothes who looked at them with polite curiosity or barely concealed judgment. But Veronica had seats in a private box that separated them from the main audience, gave them space to exist without scrutiny. The children's program was exactly what Veronica had promised: interactive, educational, designed to make orchestral music accessible to young audiences. The conductor explained how different instruments work together, invited children to stand and conduct one piece, encouraged movement and participation instead of the stuffy formality adult classical concerts demanded. Cassie was enraptured. She sat on the edge of her seat, eyes huge, drinking in every moment. When the conductor invited children to stand and move to the music, she was up, immediately swaying and spinning with unself-conscious joy. Raymond watched her and felt something crack open in his chest, grief and gratitude tangled together so tightly he couldn't separate them. Sarah should have been here for this. Sarah would have loved this, would have been standing right next to Cassie, dancing without caring who watched. Sarah had believed joy was meant to be expressed fully, that holding back feelings was a kind of death. Raymond had always been more reserved, more aware of social expectations, more careful. But he'd loved watching Sarah be fully herself, had envied her freedom even while not quite understanding how to achieve it himself. Veronica touched his arm gently. "She's happy." Raymond nodded, not trusting his voice. Veronica's hand stayed on his arm for a moment longer, a gesture that acknowledged what he couldn't say, then withdrew. They watched Cassie dance to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, her dinosaur dress swirling, her laughter rising above the strings. After the concert, Veronica suggested ice cream. They found a place nearby that stayed open late, catered to families and late-night sugar cravings. Cassie ordered chocolate with sprinkles and proceeded to eat it with the single-minded focus she brought to things she loved. Raymond got vanilla. Veronica ordered nothing, just sat with them and watched Cassie enjoy her ice cream like it was the best thing that had ever happened. "Can I ask you something?" Veronica addressed Cassie directly. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Cassie considered this while licking chocolate off her spoon. "Like my dad, someone who helps people even when nobody's watching." Veronica's expression did something complicated, surprise and sorrow, and something that might have been envy. That's a wonderful goal. But also, what do you want to learn about? What makes you curious everything? Cassie said it with the confidence of a child who hadn't yet learned the word was too big to mean seriously. But mostly space stuff, and oceans, and how brains work, and why some people are nice and others aren't. She paused, then added with devastating casualness, my mom died because her brain stopped working right. Dad says it was a stroke. He saved you from the same thing. I think if I learn about brains, maybe I can help people not die. The silence that followed was the kind that held too much weight for casual settings. Other families chattered around them, children laughing, adults conversing about mundane things. At their table, an 8-year-old had just articulated life purpose, born from loss, and the two adults with her were trying to figure out how to respond. Veronica spoke first, her voice careful. That's very brave and very smart. I think you could do that. I think you could help a lot of people. She looked at Raymond, then back to Cassie. Do you know what I do for work? Cassie nodded. You make computer stuff, technology things, close. We make devices that help people with disabilities, people who can't walk or can't see or can't hear well. We try to create technology that gives them back abilities they've lost. Veronica leaned forward slightly. If you really want to help people with brain problems, you'll need to study a lot. Science and math and medicine. It's hard work, but I could help with that if you want. I know people who study brains who do research. When you're older, if you're still interested, I could introduce you to them. Cassie's eyes went huge. Really, you do that? Of course, people should help other people pursue their dreams. That's how the world gets better. Raymond listened to this exchange and felt like he was watching his daughter's future split into possibilities he'd never been able to provide. Connections with researchers, access to opportunities, mentorship from someone who understood how to navigate systems, Raymond barely comprehended, all of it suddenly available because he'd broken a glass door. That night, after Cassie was asleep, Raymond stood on his balcony and tried to process what was happening. Veronica was integrating herself into their lives with the kind of strategic planning she probably brought to business deals. Except this wasn't strategic, or if it was, the strategy served emotional needs rather than financial ones. His phone buzzed. I hope I didn't overstep with Cassie. About offering to help with her education. I meant it, but I should have asked you first. Raymond typed back, it's fine. She was happy. Thank you for taking us. The response came quickly. Thank you for letting me be part of this. I can't remember the last time I did something just because it felt good. No agenda, no business purpose, just enjoyment. It's been a long time. Raymond read the message twice, heard the loneliness underneath the words. You're welcome to join us for regular stuff too, not just concerts and museums. We make pancakes on Saturday mornings. Very ordinary pancakes. Nothing special. The response took longer this time. I'd like that. A lot. Thursday brought another text from Veronica, this time asking if she could take Cassie shopping for school supplies. Friday, she invited them to an early dinner. Nothing fancy, just a restaurant she liked that had good pasta. Saturday morning, she showed up at Raymond's apartment at 9 a.m. with ingredients for pancakes and an admission that she'd never actually made them before. Cassie was delighted. She appointed herself head chef and directed both adults through the process with the authority of someone who'd made pancakes dozens of times. Veronica burned the first batch, Raymond salvaged the second, and by the third attempt, they'd developed a working system. They ate breakfast around Raymond's small kitchen table, the space crowded but comfortable. Veronica looked around the apartment with obvious curiosity. Raymond tried to see it through her eyes, the worn furniture, the crayon marks on walls he hadn't managed to clean completely, the photographs of Sarah that still hung because removing them felt like betrayal. It was a space marked by financial constraint and emotional preservation, nothing like the minimalist elegance of her penthouse. But Veronica didn't seem uncomfortable. If anything, she looked more relaxed than Raymond had seen her. She ate burned pancakes with apparent enjoyment, laughed when Cassie insisted they play a board game after breakfast, lost gracefully when Cassie won 3 games in a row. Around noon, Veronica's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her expression shifted, the relaxation replaced by tension. I need to take this work thing. I'm sorry. She stepped onto Raymond's small balcony, and through the glass door, Raymond could hear fragments of conversation. Numbers, percentages, someone named Richard, who apparently couldn't handle a deal that was falling apart. Veronica's voice got sharper, her CEO persona asserting itself against whatever crisis was unfolding. When she came back inside, she looked exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical recovery from the stroke. I have to go. There's a situation at work that needs... She stopped mid-sentence, looked at Cassie, who was setting up another board game, looked at Raymond, who was cleaning pancake dishes. Actually, no. Richard can handle it. That's why I hired him. She sat back down, picked up the dice, and asked Cassie to explain the rules again. Raymond watched this and understood something about Veronica that hadn't been clear before. She was actively choosing presence over work, choosing connection over corporate emergency, and the choosing was costing her something. The work would always be there, would always demand more, would always have another crisis. But this moment, this morning of burned pancakes and board games wouldn't repeat itself. Sunday, Veronica suggested a park. Monday, she asked if Cassie wanted to visit the Science Museum again. Tuesday, she showed up with dinner from a restaurant she thought Cassie would like. By Wednesday, Raymond realized they'd spent part of every day together for over a week, and the strangeness of it had worn off into something that felt dangerously normal. That evening, after Cassie was in bed, Veronica lingered. She'd been doing that more, staying after Cassie's bedtime, sitting on Raymond's balcony or at his kitchen table, talking about things that had nothing to do with the initial crisis that brought them together. Tonight, she looked troubled, her fingers tapping an anxious rhythm on her coffee mug. I got a call from my board today. They want to meet with me next week to discuss my reduced engagement with company operations. She used air quotes around the phrase, her expression, bitter. They're worried. Stock price is down 3% since the stroke. Investors are nervous about my health, about whether I'm still fully committed. Richard says some board members are questioning whether I should step back from day-to-day operations. Raymond set down his own coffee. That seems premature. You had a stroke 3 weeks ago. You're still recovering. Veronica laughed without humor. In my world, there's no such thing as recovery time. You're either fully operational or you're a liability. Weakness isn't tolerated even when it's medically necessary. She looked at him, and Raymond saw fear underneath the frustration. Part of me wants to go back, full force, prove them wrong, show them I'm still the person who built that company. But another part of me, she gestured vaguely at the apartment, at the evidence of the time she'd been spending here. Another part thinks maybe they're right. Maybe I should step back. Maybe what I was doing before wasn't sustainable, wasn't healthy, wasn't actually making me happy, even if it looked successful from outside. Raymond didn't know how to advise someone about board meetings and stock prices and corporate politics. That world was as foreign to him as his world probably was to Veronica. But he understood fear and uncertainty and the difficulty of changing paths. What do you want? Not what the board wants, not what investors expect. What do you actually want? Veronica was quiet for a long time. I want more mornings like this Saturday. More afternoons watching Cassie get excited about science. More evenings where I'm not reviewing contracts or answering emails at midnight. She started again. I want to feel like my life matters beyond quarterly earnings. Like if I disappeared tomorrow, someone would miss me as a person, not just as a revenue generator. She met his eyes. Is that selfish, to want to step back from everything I built just because I'm finally happy? Raymond thought about Sarah, about the choices she'd made, about how she'd decided being Cassie's mother was more important than marine biology, about how she'd never seemed to regret it, even when Raymond knew she missed the dream she'd surrendered. I think happiness isn't selfish. I think it's necessary. And I think building something doesn't mean you have to maintain it forever, especially if maintaining it costs you everything else. Veronica absorbed this. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable enough that words weren't required. Finally, she stood, gathered her things. Thank you for letting me be here, for not making this weird. Raymond walked her to the door. It was weird objectively. A billionaire CEO spending her evenings in a janitor's cramped apartment, playing board games with his daughter, eating takeout on mismatched plates. But weird didn't mean wrong. You're welcome here, anytime. Veronica smiled, genuine and warm. See you tomorrow. Raymond nodded. See you tomorrow. Thursday morning brought the call Raymond had been waiting for. Douglas Chen's assistant, speaking in careful HR language, invited him to a meeting Friday afternoon to discuss his employment status. They'd completed their review of the incident. Management wanted to speak with him in person about next steps. Raymond agreed to the meeting and spent the next day trying not to imagine worst-case scenarios. He'd violated protocols, broken expensive property, entered a restricted space without authorization. That he'd saved someone's life might not matter to a liability-focused management team. Companies had fired people for less. He didn't tell Veronica about the meeting. She had her own board meeting Friday, her own professional crisis to navigate. He didn't want to add his problems to her list. Friday afternoon, Raymond took the subway to the building he'd worked in for 3 years. Walking through the lobby during daylight felt strange. He'd only ever seen it at 2 a.m. Empty except for security guards and the occasional employee working improbably late. Now it bustled with people in business clothes, their purposeful strides suggesting careers and aspirations that existed in a different realm than janitorial work. The meeting was in a conference room on the 3rd floor. Douglas Chen sat at the head of the table, flanked by the head of HR and someone Raymond didn't recognize wearing a suit expensive enough to signal corporate lawyer. Phillips was there too, still in his security uniform, looking uncomfortable in a space designed for executives. Raymond sat across from them and waited. Chen opened a folder, glanced at documents, then looked up with an expression Raymond couldn't read. "Mr. Carter, we've completed our review of the incident on August 15th. We've reviewed all security footage, interviewed relevant personnel, consulted with our legal team, and received direct input from Ms. Chase herself." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation settle. "You violated multiple security protocols. You caused significant property damage. You entered a restricted area without authorization. Under normal circumstances, these violations would result in immediate termination." Raymond's stomach dropped. He'd expected this, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a blow. "However," Chen continued, "the circumstances were extraordinary. Your actions directly saved Ms. Chase's life. Our legal counsel has determined that terminating your employment would create significant liability exposure given the circumstances. Additionally, Ms. Chase has made it clear she would view your termination as unacceptable." He closed the folder. "We're not terminating you, Mr. Carter. We're promoting you. We're creating a position, Director of Facility Operations. It's a management role overseeing all building maintenance and cleaning staff. Better hours, better pay, benefits package. You'd start Monday if you're interested." Raymond stared at him. The words didn't process correctly, like his brain couldn't translate the sounds into meaning that made sense. "I don't understand." Chen's expression softened slightly. Ms. Chase insisted. "She said any organization would be lucky to have someone with your attention to detail and crisis management skills. She made a very persuasive case to our parent company's board. And frankly, after reviewing your performance record, we agree. You've never missed a shift, never had a complaint, always exceeded expectations in a job most people treat as temporary. You deserve better than mopping floors at 2 a.m. The HR person slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents outlining the new position, the salary 3 times what he made. Now the benefits, the responsibilities. "Take the weekend to review everything. Let us know Monday if you accept." Raymond took the folder in hands that weren't quite steady. This was too much, too fast, too obviously influenced by Veronica's intervention. Part of him wanted to refuse on principle, to reject advancement that came from connections rather than merit. But principle wouldn't pay for Cassie's school, wouldn't give them better housing, wouldn't create the stability she deserved. "Thank you. I'll review it and let you know." He left the building in a daze. The subway ride home passed without him registering any of it. When he finally focused enough to check his phone, there was a text from Veronica. How did the meeting go? So she had known, had probably orchestrated all of it, called in favors or made threats, or simply used her power to force outcomes she wanted. Raymond felt gratitude and resentment tangled together in ways that made his head hurt. "They offered me a promotion, management position." "You didn't have to do that." The response came quickly. "I didn't do anything except tell them the truth, that you're exceptional at what you do and deserve recognition. The rest was their decision." Another message followed immediately. "Can we talk in person? I have news too." They met at a coffee shop halfway between their respective apartments. Veronica looked different, lighter somehow, like a weight had lifted. She ordered coffee, Raymond ordered tea, and they sat at a corner table where the ambient noise of other customers created privacy through sound. "I told my board I'm stepping down as CEO." Raymond absorbed this. Stepping down seemed like an understatement, like saying Sarah had passed away instead of died. What did they say? What you'd expect. Shock. Concern about stock price, questions about my health and judgment. A few supportive comments from people who've known me since the beginning. Mostly panic. She smiled and it looked genuine. But I held firm. I'm transitioning to chairman of the board. I'll still have input on major decisions, but I'm removing myself from day-to-day operations. And I'm establishing a foundation focused on stroke awareness and support for single parents. The foundation part felt pointed. Raymond recognized when he was being made into someone's emotional project. That's good. If it's what you want, it is. Veronica's certainty was absolute. I've spent 15 years building something I'm proud of professionally but empty personally. I nearly died alone at my desk because work was more important than living. I don't want to do that anymore. She reached across the table, took his hand. You and Cassie showed me what I was missing. Showed me that presence matters more than achievement, that relationships are worth more than revenue. I want to build something that reflects those values. Raymond looked at their joined hands, thought about all the ways their lives had tangled since that night on the 42nd floor. I don't know how to do this. Whatever this is between us. You're important to Cassie. Hell, you're becoming important to me. But I don't know what that means or where it goes or how to navigate something this complicated. Veronica squeezed his hand. I don't know either, but I'd like to figure it out together if you're willing. Raymond thought about the promotion, about the foundation bearing his family's name, about Cassie's joy when Veronica visited, about Saturday morning pancakes and board games and the slow construction of something that looked like family but existed outside traditional definitions. Okay, yeah, let's figure it out. They finished their coffee and went their separate ways. Raymond picked up Cassie from his mother-in-law's house, took her home, made dinner while she did homework. Normal evening routine in a life that was becoming increasingly abnormal. That night, after Cassie was asleep, Raymond stood on his balcony and looked at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Veronica was in her penthouse, probably working despite her decision to step back, probably processing her own version of what their conversation had meant. His phone buzzed. Thank you for saying yes, to figuring it out together. I think we're building something important here, even if we don't know what to call it yet. Good night, Raymond. Raymond typed back, good night, Veronica. See you Saturday for pancakes. The response came immediately. I'll bring the ingredients, and maybe we won't burn them this time. Raymond smiled and went inside. Monday, he'd start a new job, begin a new chapter, step into a version of his life that 3 weeks ago would have seemed impossible. Monday, Cassie would start visiting the private school that his new salary and Veronica's check had made possible. Monday, the foundation would officially launch, carrying his wife's memory forward into something that helped other families. But tonight, he'd just be grateful. Grateful he'd learned to recognize a stroke's symptoms, grateful he had broken that glass door, grateful for the strange mercy of being given a second chance to save someone. Not Sarah, he'd never get that chance back, but Veronica. And in saving her somehow, finding a way to save himself and Cassie from the isolation grief had built around them. The city hummed outside his window. Millions of people in their own apartments with their own problems and possibilities. Raymond wondered how many of them understood what he was learning, that the most significant moments often came disguised as ordinary choices, that heroism was less about grand gestures and more about showing up when it mattered. He'd been a janitor who noticed a CEO in distress. She'd been a billionaire who learned to value presence over power. Together, they were building something neither could have created, a family forged not from blood, but from deliberate choice, from mutual recognition of what they'd both been missing. Tomorrow would bring complications. Veronica's board would resist her decision. Raymond's coworkers would resent his sudden promotion. People would question the appropriateness of their relationship. But complications were inevitable when you tried to build something new, when you refused to accept that lives had to follow prescribed patterns. For now, Raymond allowed himself to feel hope. Cautious, uncertain hope that maybe this strange beginning would lead somewhere good. That maybe the worst night of his life and the best decision he'd made were somehow the same thing. That maybe being seen, really seen by the right person at the right moment, was enough to change everything. He checked on Cassie one more time before bed. She slept peacefully, dinosaur pajamas, rumpled stuffed animal tucked under her arm. Sarah's daughter, his daughter, and now in some undefined but real way, Veronica's daughter too. Raymond whispered goodnight to the ghost of his wife, who would never hear it to the daughter who wouldn't remember it, to the possibility of a future that looked nothing like he'd expected and everything he hadn't known to hope for. Then he went to bed and slept dreamlessly, the sleep of someone who'd saved a life and accepted help and was finally allowing himself to believe that good things could happen again. Monday morning arrived with the weight of transformation. Raymond stood outside the building that had been his workplace for 3 years, but now he'd enter through the main doors instead of the service entrance, take the elevator to the 3rd floor instead of starting at the top and working down. The shift supervisor who used to assign him floors now reported to him. The reality felt surreal enough that Raymond half expected to wake up and find the promotion had been a dream born from desperation. The director of facility operations office was small but real desk computer window overlooking the street. His predecessor had retired 6 months ago, and the position had remained vacant while management debated whether they needed it at all. Veronica's intervention had answered that question definitively. Raymond spent his first morning reviewing staff schedules and maintenance logs, familiarizing himself with systems he'd worked within but never managed. Philip stopped by mid-morning leaning against the doorframe with a knowing expression. Never thought I'd see the day Carter got an office. You adjusting okay? Raymond gestured at the computer screen displaying spreadsheets he barely understood. Ask me in a month. Right now I'm drowning in data about elevator maintenance schedules. Phillips laughed. You'll figure it out. You've got good instincts, that's what matters. The technical stuff you can learn. He grew more serious. Some of the night crew are pissed, though, wondering why you got jumped over people with more seniority, more experience. You should expect some resistance. Raymond had anticipated this. Office politics were inevitable when someone leapfrogged the hierarchy. The janitorial staff he'd worked alongside for 3 years would see his promotion as favoritism, at best corruption at worst. They wouldn't be entirely wrong. Veronica's influence had absolutely played a role, even if management claimed otherwise. I'll talk to them, explain what I can. Philip straightened. Good luck with that. And hey, what you did for Ms. Chase. That was solid. Nobody with sense questions that part. After Phillips left, Raymond tried to focus on maintenance protocols, but his mind kept drifting to Cassie's first day at her new school. He dropped her off that morning at a building that looked more like a university than an elementary institution, sprawling campus, modern facilities, students who arrived in cars instead of walking or taking buses. Cassie had been nervous and excited simultaneously, clutching her new backpack like armor. She'd looked back once before entering, checking that he was still there. Raymond had waved, tried to project confidence he didn't feel. This school represented opportunity, but also exposure. Cassie would be surrounded by children from wealthy families, children whose normal was her extraordinary. The class divide would be invisible to some, glaring to others. His phone buzzed. Veronica, how's day 1 treating you? Raymond typed back, overwhelming but manageable. The response came quickly. Board meeting in an hour, officially announcing my transition. Wish me luck. You don't need luck. You're doing the right thing. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, thank you. That helps more than you know. The afternoon brought meetings, facilities, management, security coordination, vendor contracts. Raymond absorbed information at maximum capacity, taking notes he had reviewed tonight when his brain had processed the initial overload. Around 4 p.m. his phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Carter, this is Beatrice Williams. We need to talk about Cassandra. His mother-in-law's voice carried an edge Raymond recognized. Beatrice disapproved of something, and whatever she disapproved of was about to become his problem. Is Cassie okay? What happened? She's fine physically. Emotionally is another matter. She came home from school today talking about a woman named Veronica who's been spending time with you both. Care to explain why I'm learning about this stranger from my granddaughter instead of you? Raymond closed his office door, lowered his voice. Veronica isn't a stranger. It's complicated. Can we discuss this in person? We certainly will. Tonight, I'll keep Cassie until you arrive. Don't make me wait. She hung up before Raymond could respond. He sat at his desk and felt the complications he'd been avoiding rush forward with teeth bared. Beatrice had been supportive after Sarah died, helping with Cassie, when Raymond worked double shifts providing emotional stability when he'd been too shattered to function properly. But she'd also been protective, to the point of possessiveness, viewing herself as Sarah's representative in Cassie's life. The subway ride to Beatrice's house in Queens took 45 minutes. Raymond used the time to prepare explanations that sounded reasonable. Veronica was someone he had helped at work. They'd become friends. She enjoyed spending time with Cassie. All technically true, all missing the emotional complexity that made the situation impossible to explain cleanly. Beatrice's house was a row home she'd owned for 30 years, modest and immaculate. She answered the door with an expression that communicated judgment before Raymond even spoke. Inside, Cassie was at the kitchen table doing homework, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. "Cassie, honey, finish your math in the living room. I need to talk to your father." Cassie gathered her materials and left with a worried glance backward. She'd learned to read tension the way some kids learn to read weather survival skill for navigating adult emotions that occasionally turn stormy. Beatrice gestured for Raymond to sit at the kitchen table. She took the chair across from him, folded her hands, and waited. The silence stretched until Raymond broke it. "What did Cassie tell you that a rich lady named Veronica has been taking you both to museums and concerts? That this woman is very nice and knows a lot about science? That she comes to your apartment and you make pancakes together?" Beatrice's expression hardened. "My granddaughter is spending time with a stranger you haven't vetted or discussed with me. As her grandmother and someone who helps care for her, I have a right to know who's being introduced into her life." Raymond kept his voice level. "You're right. I should have told you. I apologize for that. But Veronica isn't a threat. She's someone I helped during a medical emergency. We've become friends. She cares about Cassie." Friends. Beatrice's skepticism was palpable. Raymond, rich people don't become friends with janitors. They have ulterior motives. Is this woman trying to buy your affection? Is she using Cassie to manipulate you somehow? It's not like that. Veronica is genuinely— "She has a name," Beatrice interrupted. "A full name I can research?" Raymond hesitated. Revealing Veronica's identity would open the situation to scrutiny he wasn't ready to face. But hiding it would only increase Beatrice's suspicion. "Veronica Chase. She's the CEO of a tech company. I found her having a stroke at work and called an ambulance. She survived because I recognized the symptoms quickly. Since then, she's wanted to express her gratitude." Beatrice pulled out her phone and started typing. Her expression shifted as search results populated surprise, concern, calculation. "Veronica Chase is a billionaire, and you expect me to believe she's spending time with you and Cassie out of pure gratitude?" "Yes, because it's true." Beatrice set down her phone. Her voice dropped to something more dangerous than anger, disappointment. "Sarah worked herself to exhaustion trying to provide for Cassie. She sacrificed her health, her dreams, everything for that child. And now you're letting some stranger with money swoop in and play savior. What happens when this woman gets bored of playing house with you, when she moves on to her next charity project, and Cassie is left heartbroken?" Raymond felt his own anger rise. Veronica isn't playing anything. She's lonely, and we've become important to each other. Cassie is happy. For the first time since Sarah died, our daughter is genuinely happy. Why is that a problem? Because happiness based on someone else's whims is unstable. Beatrice leaned forward. "I love you, Raymond. You've been a good father despite impossible circumstances. But you're naive if you think this situation doesn't have complications you're not seeing." She softened slightly. "I'm not forbidding this. I'm asking you to be careful, to protect Cassie's heart, to remember that billionaires live in different worlds with different rules. When those worlds collide with ours, we're the ones who get hurt." Raymond left Beatrice's house with Cassie in a knot in his stomach. His mother-in-law had articulated fears he had been suppressing, that Veronica's involvement was temporary, that the class divide would eventually tear this apart, that Cassie's attachment was setting her up for abandonment. That night after Cassie was asleep, Raymond sat on his balcony and tried to process everything. His phone buzzed. "Veronica, board meeting was rough, but I survived. Made the announcement. Stock dropped 4%. Several board members requested private meetings to discuss concerns. Basically what I expected." Another message followed. "Are you okay? You seem distant." Raymond called instead of texting. Veronica answered immediately. "What's wrong?" "I talked to Cassie's grandmother today. She's concerned about you spending time with us. About what happens when you move on to other interests." Veronica was quiet for a moment. "She thinks I'm going to abandon Cassie. Are you—" The question came out harsher than intended. Raymond heard Veronica's sharp intake of breath. No, God, no. Raymond, She stopped, started again. I understand why she's worried. I understand that from outside this looks like exactly what she thinks it is. But I'm not playing at this. You and Cassie have become the most important part of my life. Losing you would devastate me as much as it would hurt Cassie. Raymond believed her, but belief didn't eliminate vulnerability. My mother-in-law raised a valid point, though. We exist in different worlds. Eventually that matters, so we figure out how to bridge the gap. Veronica's determination carried through the phone. I'm not giving up on this because it's complicated. They talked for another hour, working through concerns neither could fully resolve. When Raymond finally hung up, he felt simultaneously better and more confused. Veronica's commitment seemed genuine, but Beatrice's warnings echoed what happened when reality intruded on whatever they were building. The following weeks tested that question repeatedly. At work, Raymond faced resistance from staff who viewed his promotion as favoritism. Equipment broke schedules, conflicted vendors missed deadlines, normal facility management chaos that he handled with increasing competence. But whispers followed him through the building. People questioned his qualifications, speculated about his relationship with Veronica, wondered aloud whether he'd slept his way into management. Phillips warned him one afternoon, voice low, the night crew's planning to file a complaint with HR, claiming the promotion process wasn't fair. They've got a point procedurally, even if we know why it happened. Raymond appreciated the heads up. He'd expected formal challenges eventually. The best response was performance proving through results that he deserved the position regardless of how he'd obtained it. But proving took time he wasn't sure he had. At Cassie's new school, different complications emerged. She struggled to fit in with children whose allowances exceeded Raymond's weekly grocery budget. The other kids talked about vacation homes and ski trips and summer camps that cost more than his rent. Cassie came home asking questions he couldn't answer satisfactorily. Why don't we have a vacation house everyone else does? We have everything we need right here, baby. But Sarah wouldn't say it, wouldn't lie to make him feel better about their financial limitations. Mia's mom said her dad is a lawyer. She asked what you do, and I said you manage a building. She said that's what her doorman does. Raymond felt the sting of class consciousness through his daughter's innocent recounting. Cassie wasn't complaining, she was trying to understand why their normal didn't match her peers' normal. How to explain that normal was contextual, that working class dignity mattered even when it looked like less. You know what matters more than what job someone has? Whether they show up for the people they love, whether they help others when they can, whether they treat people with kindness regardless of how much money they make. Cassie absorbed this, nodded slowly. Like you helped Miss Veronica. Exactly like that. But Raymond wondered if his daughter would always understand that distinction, or if her new environment would eventually teach her to value wealth over character. Veronica struggled with her own transitions. The board was resisting her decision to step back, concerned about leadership vacuum and investor perception. Her phone rang constantly with crises that apparently only she could resolve. She tried to maintain boundaries, tried to honor her commitment to presence, but the pull of work was powerful. One Tuesday evening, Veronica arrived at Raymond's apartment for their standing dinner, clearly stressed. Her hands shook slightly when she took off her coat. She sat at the kitchen table while Raymond cooked and Cassie did homework, but her attention was fragmented. Miss Veronica, can you help me with this math problem? Cassie held up her worksheet. Veronica glanced at it, distracted. Ask your dad, honey. I'm not good at math right now. Cassie's face fell. But you're always good at helping. Raymond caught Veronica's eye, saw her realize what she'd done. She set down her phone deliberately. You're right, I'm sorry. Show me the problem. She focused completely on Cassie for the next 20 minutes, walking her through the math with the patience she'd always shown. But when Cassie went to get ready for bed, Veronica's phone immediately reclaimed her attention. Raymond served dinner pasta with the sauce Cassie liked, garlic bread, salad that Veronica would eat 2 bites of before forgetting. He sat across from her and waited until she noticed he was watching. Talk to me. Veronica set down her phone. Her expression was exhausted and frustrated. The Chen deal is falling apart. They're threatening to pull out entirely because they want me specifically handling negotiations. Richard can't close it, and the board is panicking because it's $300 million. She rubbed her face. They called an emergency meeting for tonight. They're asking me to fly to Los Angeles tomorrow for face-to-face negotiations. They're basically saying if I don't go, the company loses the deal and the stock price tanks further. What do you want to do? Veronica looked at him like he'd asked an impossible question. I want to tell them to figure it out themselves. I want to stay here and have dinner with you and help Cassie with homework and not think about quarterly earnings. But I can't. This is $300 million. Jobs depend on this. Investor confidence depends on this. I have responsibilities. Raymond heard the rationalization, recognized the pattern. Work would always have another crisis, another emergency, another reason why presence could be sacrificed for performance. You could say no and watch the company I built crumble. Watch people lose their jobs because I'm too selfish to handle one negotiation. Raymond kept his voice gentle. Or you could trust that the people you hired are capable of handling this. That stepping back means actually stepping back, not just pretending until the first crisis comes. Veronica's phone buzzed. She glanced at it reflexively. The notification showed Angela calling. Veronica stared at the screen and Raymond watched her struggle. The CEO persona wanted to answer to solve to control. The person who'd been having dinner with him and Cassie for weeks wanted to stay. She pressed decline. Let the call go to voicemail. Looked at Raymond with something between defiance and terror. I'm not going to LA. They'll have to manage without me. Are you sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. She texted something rapidly, presumably to Angela or the board, then turned off her phone completely. The gesture was both powerful and frightening, cutting herself off from the company that had defined her for 15 years. They finished dinner in relative silence. Cassie returned from brushing her teeth and curled up between them on the couch for the nature documentary they'd been watching in episodes. Veronica seemed to physically relax as the show progressed, her attention gradually shifting from whatever corporate crisis she'd refused toward the narrative of wolves raising their pack. When Cassie fell asleep against Veronica's shoulder, Raymond carefully extracted his daughter and carried her to bed. Veronica stayed on the couch staring at her silent phone like it might explode. They're going to be furious. The board, the investors, probably Richard most of all. Raymond sat back down. Maybe, but you made a choice. That matters. Does it? Veronica's voice was small. What if I just torpedoed the company I spent 15 years building because I wanted to watch a documentary about wolves? Raymond thought about Sarah's last call, the one he hadn't answered because he was mopping floors. The call that had just been her wanting to talk, to connect, to share her day before the stroke, took her ability to share anything. 3 years ago, my wife called me at work. I was busy. I told her I'd call back on my break. She said, okay, we'll talk later. There wasn't a later. He met Veronica's eyes. I can't tell you the company will be fine. Maybe it won't. Maybe this costs you everything professionally. But I can tell you that the people who matter remember presence, not deals. Cassie will remember you helping with her math tonight. She won't remember whether some company in LA got $300 million. Veronica's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. What if I'm not strong enough to keep choosing this, to keep putting people over performance? Then we'll remind you, that's what family does. The word hung between them, family. Neither had said it explicitly before, but there it was, defining what they'd become without formal recognition. Veronica stayed another hour. They talked about nothing important, the documentary, Cassie's upcoming science fair project, whether the apartment's heater would survive another winter. Normal conversation that felt revolutionary because it happened instead of Veronica being on a plane to Los Angeles. When she finally left, Raymond walked her to the street where her car waited. The driver, she'd never stopped using a driver despite her other changes, held the door. Veronica paused before getting in. Thank you for stopping me from making the same mistake again. Raymond hugged her, brief but genuine. See you tomorrow. Definitely. The next morning brought consequences. Veronica's phone, when she turned it back on, exploded with messages. The board was furious. The LA company had pulled out of negotiations, entirely insulted by Veronica's absence. Stock dropped another 6%. 3 board members demanded her immediate resignation. Veronica called Raymond, mid-morning, voice shaking. I destroyed everything. 48 hours of choosing presence, and I've undone 15 years of work. Raymond was in a meeting about HVAC replacement, but stepped out. What do you want to do? I don't know. Part of me wants to grovel, fix this, prove I can still manage the company. Part of me wants to resign and be done with all of it. What does your gut say? Long pause. that I'm done, that if one missed negotiation destroys confidence in leadership, then the leadership wasn't stable to begin with, that maybe this is the universe telling me it's time. Then trust that. Another pause. I have a call with the board this afternoon. I think I'm going to resign as chairman, step away completely. Am I crazy? Raymond thought about his own leap from night janitor to facility director, from invisible to recognized, from closed off to vulnerable. Maybe. But crazy doesn't mean wrong. The afternoon brought Veronica's resignation. She called Raymond afterward, voice steady with relief and terror mixed equally. I did it. Completely out. They'll announce tomorrow. Stock will probably tank further. I'll probably trend on social media as a failure. But I'm done, she laughed slightly, hysterical. I'm 42 years old and I just quit the only thing I've ever been successful at. What the hell do I do now? You could start by coming over for dinner. Cassie made you a picture today. Something about neurons and stars. I don't understand it, but she's very proud. Veronica's voice softened. I'll be there. Give me an hour. That evening, Veronica arrived at Raymond's apartment without her phone, without her professional armor, just herself. Cassie presented her drawing, a bizarre but charming combination of brain cells and nebulas, and explained her theory about how the universe and human consciousness were connected through patterns. Veronica listened with complete attention, asked questions that made Cassie think harder, praised both the art and the theory. They had dinner, played board games, watched another episode of the Wolf documentary. Normal evening in a life that was becoming their routine. After Cassie was asleep, Veronica and Raymond sat on the balcony. The city spread out below, indifferent to corporate resignations and life changes, and the small dramas of individual people trying to figure out how to be happy. I got another call this afternoon. After I resigned, Veronica stared at the city lights. The President's Council for Economic Recovery. They want me to join. It's prestigious, important work, lots of travel to Washington, the kind of opportunity people spend careers pursuing. She turned to face Raymond. I turned it down. Told them I'm stepping back from professional commitments to focus on personal priorities. They were confused. Nobody turns down the President's Council. Why did you? Because it would mean missing Cassie's school concerts and Saturday morning pancakes and regular evenings watching documentaries about wolves. Because I've spent my entire adult life chasing prestige, and I finally understand that the biggest opportunity is right here. Being present. Raymond felt something tight in his chest loosen. You're serious about this, about us, about this life. More serious than I've been about anything. Veronica's voice carried certainty. I know it's fast. I know we haven't defined what this is or where it's going. But I'm all in, Raymond. You and Cassie are my family now. If you'll have me. Raymond thought about Beatrice's warnings about class divides and unstable happiness. Thought about all the ways this could fall apart. Then he thought about Cassie's laughter when Veronica helped with homework, about Veronica's genuine joy during their ordinary evenings, about how grief had taught him that caution sometimes costs more than risk. Yeah, we'll have you. They sat in comfortable silence. The city hummed its electric lullaby. Somewhere in that sprawl of lights and lives, people were making their own choices about what mattered. Raymond had made his to trust that presence was enough, that connection could bridge gaps that logic said were unbridgeable, that family was something you built deliberately rather than inherited by accident. His phone buzzed. Beatrice, I heard about Veronica Chase resigning. It's all over the news. This have anything to do with you and Cassie Raymond? Type back, yes. She chose us over work. That should tell you something about her intentions. The response took a few minutes. It tells me she's serious. Doesn't mean I'm not worried, but I'm willing to meet her. Sunday dinner, my house. Don't be late. Raymond showed Veronica the exchange. She read it twice. Expression, nervous. She wants to meet me. This is getting real. It's been real. This just makes it official. Veronica nodded slowly. Okay. Sunday dinner with your mother-in-law. How hard could that be? Raymond laughed. You've faced boardrooms and investors. You'll survive, Beatrice. But he wondered if that was true. Beatrice had a gift for seeing through pretense, for identifying weakness, for protecting what she loved with fierce determination. Sunday would either integrate Veronica into their extended family or expose the fundamental impossibility of what they were attempting. Only one way to find out which. Sunday dinner at Beatrice's house carried the weight of judgment. Veronica arrived 15 minutes early, which Raymond recognized as strategic anxiety, better to wait than to arrive late, and confirm negative assumptions. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, deliberately casual, in a way that probably required more thought than her usual business attire. The driver stayed with the car at Raymond's insistence. Walking the 3 blocks from where they'd parked felt important somehow, like approaching on foot made them more human, less separate. Beatrice answered the door with an expression that gave nothing away. She looked Veronica up and down, once quick assessment that cataloged everything from shoes to posture, then stepped aside. "Come in, dinner's almost ready." The house smelled like the pot roast Beatrice made for important occasions. Sarah had loved this meal, had requested it for birthdays and celebrations. Raymond wondered if his mother-in-law had chosen it deliberately, a reminder of who was missing, test of whether Veronica could exist in spaces still haunted by Sarah's memory. Cassie bounded down the stairs, threw herself at Veronica with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of 9-year-olds. Somewhere in the past months, she'd had a birthday, had turned another year older, while Raymond was learning to be a manager and Veronica was learning to not be a CEO. Time moved strangely when lives were transforming. "Miss Veronica, Grandma's making the roast. It's so good. You're going to love it." Veronica hugged Cassie back, genuine warmth that softened her nervous edges. "I'm sure I will." Beatrice watched this interaction with an expression Raymond couldn't quite read. She gestured toward the dining room. "Cassie, set the table, please. Raymond, help me in the kitchen. Miss Chase, make yourself comfortable." The separation was deliberate. Beatrice wanted Raymond alone, wanted to deliver whatever verdict she'd formed before the meal complicated things. In the kitchen, she kept her voice low while checking the roast. "She's prettier in person than in pictures. Younger, too. I thought billionaires were old men." Raymond pulled plates from the cabinet. "She's 42, hardly ancient." Beatrice made a non-committal sound. "She seems nervous." "That's good. Means she cares what I think." "She does. We both do." His mother-in-law turned to face him fully. I looked into her. The resignation, the foundation, all of it. "She walked away from billions, Raymond. People don't do that on a whim." "I know. Do you?" Beatrice's eyes were sharp. "Because I also read about the stock crash after she resigned, about the lawsuits from investors who lost money, about the board members calling her mentally unstable. She destroyed her professional reputation for you and Cassie." Raymond felt defensive heat rise. "We didn't ask her to resign. That was her choice." "I know. That's what worries me." Beatrice pulled the roast from the oven. People who make dramatic gestures eventually expect appreciation that matches the sacrifice. What happens when she realizes playing house doesn't fulfill her the way running a company did? When she resents what she gave up? The same fear Beatrice had voiced weeks ago, now sharpened by Veronica's escalating commitment. Raymond didn't have a good answer because the fear was legitimate. Veronica had blown up her entire life. The foundation work was meaningful but couldn't possibly replicate the adrenaline of building an empire. Eventually reality would intrude. Eventually she might regret everything. "I guess we'll find out together." Raymond met his mother-in-law's gaze. "But I'm choosing to trust her. For Cassie's sake and mine." Beatrice nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But I'm watching. And if she hurts my granddaughter, billionaire or not, she'll answer to me." Dinner was an exercise in polite interrogation. Beatrice asked questions that sounded casual but probed for weakness, Veronica's family history, her relationship patterns, her long-term plans. Veronica answered with careful honesty, not hiding the loneliness or the mistakes, but also not apologizing for who she'd been. When Beatrice asked about children, did Veronica want them? Had she considered starting a family? Veronica set down her fork and met the older woman's eyes directly. "I never wanted children because I was terrified of failing them the way I failed my mother. But Cassie has taught me that family isn't about biology or perfection. It's about showing up. And I intend to keep showing up for her as long as she'll let me." Cassie looked up from her pot roast. "Forever right. You'll show up forever." The question was aimed at Veronica, but the weight landed on everyone. Raymond watched his daughter's face, saw the vulnerability behind her certainty. Cassie had lost her mother. The idea of losing another important person terrified her, even if she couldn't articulate it. Veronica reached across the table, took Cassie's hand. "Forever. I promise." Beatrice watched this exchange and something in her expression shifted. Not approval exactly, but acceptance. After dinner, while Cassie showed Veronica her room and the collections of rocks and books that filled it, Beatrice pulled Raymond aside. She's in love with you. You know that, right? Raymond frowned. It's not like that. We're family. It's different. Is it Beatrice's knowing look was uncomfortable? Maybe not romantic, but love nonetheless. Be careful with that. Love makes people do irrational things, like resign from billion-dollar companies. Raymond didn't have a response. Later, driving home with Veronica and Cassie, they'd finally let the driver pick them up. He thought about his mother-in-law's observation. Was Veronica in love with him? Was he in love with her? The feelings were certainly intense, certainly deeper than friendship. But romantic felt wrong, like forcing a definition that didn't fit the shape of what they'd built. Veronica broke the silence. Your mother-in-law is formidable. I respect that. She likes you, or at least she stopped actively disapproving. Veronica smiled. I'll take it. Cassie, half asleep in the back seat, mumbled something about pot roast being better than pancakes, but not telling them because it would hurt their feelings. Both adults laughed, tension breaking into something easier. The months that followed developed their own rhythm. Raymond managed building operations with increasing confidence, earning grudging respect from staff who'd initially resented his promotion. The complaints to HR went nowhere. His performance metrics were solid problems, got solved. The facility ran smoother than it had in years. Veronica threw herself into foundation work with the same intensity she'd once brought to corporate leadership. The Second Chance Initiative launched officially in November, 6 months after the stroke. The gala was smaller than originally planned. Veronica had scaled back, preferring substance to spectacle, but still raised significant funds. Raymond attended in a rented tux that felt like costume. Cassie wore the dress Veronica had bought over his protests, though by now he'd stopped protesting as much. The battle over accepting help had been lost, gradually worn down by Cassie's opportunities and Veronica's insistence that gifts weren't charity when they came from family. The foundation's first initiative was the Carter Family Scholarship for children of single parents. Raymond had argued against using Sarah's name, felt uncomfortable turning his wife's death into a brand. But Veronica had been firm. Her loss matters. Honoring it by helping others makes meaning from tragedy. That's not exploitation, it's alchemy. The scholarship office opened in January in a community center in Raymond's neighborhood. Veronica had wanted it accessible to the families who needed it most, not hidden in some downtown office tower. The first recipients were announced in February, 15 families receiving support for education, childcare, and living expenses. Raymond met them all, shook hands with parents working multiple jobs who cried when they learned someone saw their struggle and cared enough to help. He thought about himself 3 years ago, about how this support would have changed everything, about how Sarah might still be alive if she hadn't been working herself to exhaustion, if stress hadn't contributed to the stroke that killed her. The foundation couldn't bring Sarah back, but it could prevent other families from losing what he'd lost. That had to be enough. Spring brought Cassie's 10th birthday. They celebrated at the apartment with cake and too many presents. Veronica still hadn't mastered the art of restrained gift-giving. Beatrice came bringing her pot roast as contribution to the party. Marcus from next door stopped by with his kids. Phillips and his wife brought flowers. The apartment filled with people who'd become their extended family through deliberate choice rather than blood relation. Veronica stood in the kitchen helping Raymond with dishes after everyone left. Cassie had passed out on the couch, sugar-crashed and happy. The apartment was a disaster of wrapping paper and crumbs. This is what it's supposed to feel like, isn't it? Veronica's voice was quiet. Family, not performing it for appearances or checking boxes. Just people who care about each other being together. Raymond dried a plate. Yeah, this is it. I never had this growing up. After my mom died, it was just me and ambition. I thought success was the same as happiness, that if I achieved enough, the emptiness would fill. She turned to face him. Thank you for teaching me the difference. The moment felt weighted with things neither knew how to say. Raymond set down the dish towel. Before he could respond, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Mr. Carter. This is Douglas Chen. I need to discuss something with you. Are you available tomorrow morning? Raymond agreed and hung up feeling unsettled. Chen only called for serious matters. The last conversation had resulted in a promotion. What came next, Monday morning, Raymond sat across from Chen in the same conference room where he'd received his promotion 9 months ago. This time, Chen wasn't alone. The head of HR and someone from the parent company's corporate office flanked him. We've been reviewing our facility management structure across all properties. Chen's voice carried professional neutrality. Your performance here has been exceptional. Metrics improved, costs, reduced staff satisfaction up. The parent company is impressed. He slid a folder across the table. They're offering you a position as Regional Director of Operations. You'd oversee facility management for 15 buildings across 3 states. Significant salary increase, full benefits, travel requirements. It's a major career advancement. Raymond opened the folder, saw numbers that seemed impossible. The salary was nearly 3 times what he made now. The position represented opportunities he'd never imagined possible. But travel requirements meant time away from Cassie. 3 states meant potential relocation. Regional director meant leaving behind the community he'd built, the routine that sustained them, the proximity to Veronica that had become essential. How much travel? Approximately 40%. 2 weeks per month on average, visiting properties, conducting audits, training local managers. It's demanding, but it's the kind of role that leads to VP positions down the line. Raymond stared at the folder. A year ago, this opportunity would have been a dream. Financial security beyond anything he'd hoped for. Professional respect that transcended his janitor origins. Proof that hard work and skill mattered more than starting position. But accepting meant disrupting everything they'd built. Cassie would lose stability right when she was thriving. Veronica would lose the daily presence that she'd restructured her entire life to maintain. He'd lose the groundedness that came from being home every night. Can I think about it? Of course. We need an answer by end of week. Raymond left the meeting and walked to the coffee shop where he and Veronica had talked months ago. He texted her, "Need to talk. Can you meet?" She arrived 20 minutes later, concern evident. What's wrong? He explained the offer, watched her process the implications. She was quiet for a long time, stirring coffee she wasn't drinking. That's an incredible opportunity. You should take it. But her voice carried no conviction. Raymond reached across the table, took her hand. I don't want to take it. The money's great, but the cost is everything we've built. I'd be gone half the time. Cassie needs stability. You need... He stopped, unsure how to finish. What do I need? Veronica's eyes were intense. This, us, the routine. I think you'd spiral without it. I think we both would. Veronica's expression crumpled. God, is that true? Am I so dependent on you and Cassie that I can't handle you having a career opportunity? It's not dependence, it's connection. There's a difference, is there? She pulled her hand back. Raymond, you should take this job. You've earned it. Don't let me and my issues hold you back from security you deserve. What if I don't want the job? What if I've learned the same lesson you did, that success isn't the same as happiness, that presence matters more than prestige? They sat in silence. The coffee shop bustled around them, people pursuing their own ambitions and anxieties. Raymond thought about Sarah, about the choices she'd made, about how she'd valued being Cassie's mother over her own career dreams. I'm turning it down. His voice was firm. I appreciate the offer, but I'm declining. My life is here. My family is here. That matters more than any promotion. Veronica's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure I don't want to be the reason you limit yourself? You're not limiting me. You're reminding me what actually matters. He stood, pulled her up, hugged her in the middle of the coffee shop, while other patrons pretended not to watch. She held on tight, and Raymond felt her shake with something between relief and residual fear. That evening, he told Cassie about the job offer and his decision. She listened with the seriousness she brought to important topics, then asked the question that mattered. Would you have been happy traveling all the time and making more money but not being here? No, baby, I wouldn't have been happy. Cassie nodded, satisfied. Then you made the right choice. Happiness is more important than money. Miss Veronica taught me that. Later, after Cassie was asleep, Raymond called Chen and declined the position. There was surprise in the building manager's voice, but also something like understanding. Not everyone prioritized advancement over stability. Some people knew when they'd found enough. Summer brought the second anniversary of the stroke. Raymond and Veronica didn't discuss it explicitly, but both were aware. 2 years since that night on the 42nd floor, 2 years of transformation neither could have predicted. They spent the day together doing ordinary things, farmer's market playground, with Cassie dinner at home. Normal elevated to sacred through attention and gratitude. Fall brought Cassie's 11th birthday and admission to a gifted program at her school. She was thriving academically, already talking about colleges and careers with the confidence of someone who'd been taught to believe in her own potential. Her science fair project on neuroplasticity won first place. The judges were impressed by the sophistication of her research and the clarity of her presentation. Veronica attended the fair with Raymond, beaming with pride that looked entirely parental. Afterward, walking to the car, Cassie held both their hands. When I grow up, I want to study brains. Like really study them, understand how they work and why they break and how to fix them. Because of what happened to Mom and what almost happened to Miss Veronica. She looked up at them. Is that okay to want to do that? Veronica knelt down to Cassie's eye-level voice thick with emotion. It's more than okay, it's extraordinary. And we'll help you get there whatever it takes. Winter brought the Foundation's one-year review. The Second Chance Initiative had helped 200 families in its first year, distributed $3 million in scholarships and support services, and expanded to 3 additional cities. The impact reports were filled with testimonials from parents who'd been able to reduce work hours, students who'd stayed in school, families who'd avoided homelessness because someone had noticed their struggle and cared enough to help. Raymond read every testimonial. Each one felt personal, felt like Sarah's death hadn't been meaningless, like tragedy had been transformed into something that prevented other tragedies. It wasn't resurrection, but it was redemption. The 3rd anniversary of the stroke arrived in late winter. This time they acknowledged it explicitly. Veronica suggested returning to the building to the 42nd floor to see the space where everything had changed. Raymond agreed, curious about how it would feel to revisit the origin point of their intersection. The building management had been informed they were coming. Phillips met them in the lobby, smiled at seeing Raymond and Veronica together with Cassie between them. The girl had grown in 3 years taller, more confident, already showing signs of the teenager she'd become. They took the elevator to 42. The executive wing had been remodeled since the stroke, new furniture, different layout, though the basic architecture remained. Veronica's old office was now occupied by the current CEO, a man Veronica knew professionally but didn't particularly like. The glass door had been replaced, no evidence remaining of the night Raymond had shattered it. But standing there, both of them remembered. Raymond could see it exactly. Veronica slumped in her chair. The recognition that had driven him to action, the calculated decision to break protocol because life mattered more than rules. What do you think about when you come here? Veronica's question was quiet. Raymond thought about his answer. Timing. How everything had to happen exactly the way it did for us to end up here. How many pieces had to fall into place. He turned to her. I think about how sometimes we have to lose everything to understand what actually matters. How the worst lessons prepare us for the most important tests. Veronica nodded. I think about who I was that night. So focused on work, I'd stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped taking care of myself. I'd convinced myself sacrifice meant success, that anything less than total commitment was failure. She gestured around the office. This place used to be my entire world. Now it's just a building. Cassie, who'd been examining the office with the curiosity of someone too young to have been there, originally turned to them with a serious expression. Miss Veronica, do you remember when you were lying on the floor? Were you scared? The question was direct in the way children ask things, unaware that adults often avoided uncomfortable truths. Veronica knelt down, brought herself to Cassie's eye level. You know what I remember most? Not being scared. Being salta, because I realized if I died right then, nobody would miss me as a person. They'd miss what I did for them, the deals I closed, the money I made, but nobody would miss me. She touched Cassie's cheek gently. And then your dad broke through that door and looked at me like I mattered. Not because of who I was or what I'd accomplished, because I was a human being who needed help. That's when I started fighting to stay conscious, because I realized maybe I wanted to live after all. Cassie processed this with the solemnity she brought to important information. Then she reached out and took Veronica's hand with one of hers, Raymond's with the other. I'm glad you wanted to live, and I'm glad my dad saved you, because now you're family, and that's better than being alone. The simple declaration carried weight that formal ceremonies couldn't match. Raymond felt his throat tighten. Veronica's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. They left the office building as a family, walking out past the lobby, where Raymond used to clock in for night shifts, past the security desk, where Philip still worked, and still greeted Raymond with respect past the revolving doors into sunlight that felt earned rather than given. That evening, back at Raymond's apartment, Cassie fell asleep early, exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. Raymond and Veronica sat on the balcony, watching the city lights emerge as dusk deepened into night. "I need to tell you something." Veronica's voice carried nervous energy. "I've been thinking about what we are to each other. How to define this." She turned to face him. "I'm not in love with you, not romantically, but I love you in ways that feel just as deep, just as essential. You and Cassie are my family. Losing you would devastate me, but I don't want to date you or marry you or complicate this with expectations that don't fit what we actually have." Raymond felt relief flood through him. "I've been trying to figure out how to say the same thing. This isn't romantic love, but it's no less real. He searched for words. You're the person I call at 3 a.m. when everything's falling apart. The person Cassie asks for when she's scared. The person whose presence makes our life complete. That's not less than romantic love. It's just different." Veronica smiled, genuine and relieved. "So we're family, chosen family, built deliberately instead of inherited by accident." Exactly that. They sat in comfortable silence. The city hummed below them, millions of people pursuing their own definitions of connection and meaning. Raymond thought about the journey from that night 3 years ago to this moment, the grief and rescue, the tentative friendship that deepened into something more complex, the slow construction of family from unlikely components. His phone buzzed. Beatrice, checking in. "How was visiting the office?" Raymond typed back. "Emotional but good. Reinforced how far we've all come." The response came quickly. "Good. Tell Veronica she's invited to Sunday dinner. No interrogation this time. Just family meal." Raymond showed Veronica the message. She read it and laughed, surprised and pleased. "I passed the test. Only took a year, closer to 18 months. But who's counting?" They talked for another hour, making plans for the foundation's expansion, discussing Cassie's upcoming science competition, debating whether the apartment's heating system would survive another winter or needed replacement. Ordinary conversation that felt extraordinary because it represented stability they'd deliberately built together. Eventually, Veronica left, hugging Raymond at the door with the casual affection of family rather than the charged intensity of romance. Raymond watched her car pull away, then went inside to check on Cassie. His daughter slept peacefully, one hand wrapped around the stuffed dinosaur that had survived years of love and wear. Raymond stood in the doorway and felt gratitude so intense it bordered on pain. 3 years ago, he'd been a janitor working night shifts, invisible and isolated, carrying grief that felt permanent. Now he managed a building supported families through a foundation bearing his wife's name and had reconstructed family with a billionaire and his daughter. The transformation seemed impossible when stated plainly. But transformation always did change, was invisible until suddenly it wasn't accumulating in small decisions and daily choices, until one day you looked around and nothing was the same. Raymond went to bed and slept deeply. Dreams of elevators and glass doors and second chances, mixing with images of Cassie's laughter and Veronica's smile and Sarah's memory, blessing it all. Tomorrow would bring new complications. The foundation would face challenges. Cassie would grow older and need different things. Veronica would struggle with her identity outside corporate success. But tonight they were family. Chosen, deliberate, imperfect family that worked precisely because they kept choosing it. And that was enough. That was everything.